Hey there, it's Melissa with melissaesplin.com and calligraphy.org. I'm excited to team up with Sakura and walk you through this abstract bouquet for a Valentine's card or really just any occasion. The tools that you will need. You'll need a water brush, a pencil. The micron pen is optional if you'd like to use that for fine details. Stardust and white jelly rolls. I'm using the size 10 jelly roll. I feel like it makes a really good mark. And then the Sakura Koi watercolor set. I'm using the 48 pan set, but really any of the sets will work really well. And then some nice watercolor paper. Let's get started. I'm getting my watercolor pencil and I'm just quickly drawing out little circles where my roses are going to be, and just basically drafting out where on the page this bouquet is actually going to end up. I am using number 32 and number 3 pigments. So it's just really a pink and a white to get me a really nice creamy color. And I'm loading that up with my water brush and creating these semicircular kind of concentric strokes. Some of them are touching, some of them aren't. But as you go, just add a little bit more water to soften those edges. I'm allowing this first one to dry while I work on another one, and you'll see why in just a second. I'm getting this yellow and I'm dipping and dropping the yellow in the center so it can bleed out and add a little bit more of a dynamic pigment here. So just keep going in these little concentric half circles, crescents, so to speak, and just working those out. And I'm adding a little bit more water as I go along, and as those petals get bigger, my color gets softer and lighter. I'm adding more water. Some parts of my strokes are really touching the prior strokes, and so it gives you this really nice melting color approach, and that's really what lends itself towards this modern loose abstract floral that's really fun. So just keeping it simple here. Now I'm getting green. I'm using the 106 and 107 green colors together. 106 is probably my favorite green. It's really creamy. And I'm just doing a couple of different lines out from the roses and then adding these little blobs of green to the sides of each of these small strokes. And this is what's going to create the underlying structure of snapdragons. We'll let those sort of start to dry a little bit because as we add the pink, it's going to melt into the green. And anyway, we don't want it to melt too much. So we're going to add the rose petals, the rose leaves on the outside while we're waiting for that initial green for the snapdragons to dry. I'm just really doing this in 2 strokes. It's almost like the same semicircular crescent strokes for these leaves, and I'm trying to make the leaves bend around my rose shapes. That bend is going to give me a nice dynamic composition where the eye just keeps getting drawn back into those roses. You really just want the eye to keep coming back into the center of your piece, and that's where the leaves and the shape and the direction of those leaves really makes a big difference. Now I'm doing just simple stems here. My lines aren't perfect. They're not very smooth. They're kind of a little more organic, but they're bending just slightly. Again, that's kind of pulling the eye out and back into the piece. I'm adding a little bit of yellow to give myself a little bit more dynamic pigment. I feel like yellow in stems is really great. Yellow in the centers of roses is really great. And because you have those yellows in 2 different spots, it's going to create a really nice look. Now I'm adding pigment to my snapdragons. I'm really just creating these little drops of ink, and my green is almost dry but not totally dry, so the colors tend to melt together a little bit, but not so much that it's getting muddy and gross. You want to have those colors add and blend together really nicely so that it all just kind of flows together. Now I'm going to add some filler flowers. These are just yellow, simple filler flowers. I'm using the same strokes that I've been using with all these other little foliage aspects, and I'm really just pulling with the point of my brush and then applying pressure right at the end. So it creates this nice little heart shape. Make sure that you have enough water in your pigment to begin with so that you have this nice blend of pigment on the paper and it doesn't get too scratchy of a line. Don't feel like you need to add them everywhere because we're going to add some more filler in just a minute. I'm just getting a dark black, kind of like thinking about Black Eyed Susans and how they have those dark centers with the yellow. It really creates a striking look. And I'm adding some little centers. Sometimes the black is touching the yellow, sometimes it's not. You don't have to make it the same every single time. Now I'm going to add some filler, and I'm kind of creating these upside down heart shapes. I'm using the point of my brush and just applying more pressure towards the end, and I'm keeping the points close and touching together so you have these kind of upside down heart shapes, which is fun because it's Valentine's but it's just like these fun little filler shapes that, yeah, they're hearts and they're upside down, some of them, but as you step back, when we're done with the bouquet, it looks more of a cohesive piece. Filler leaves are a little bit different than the rose leaves. They're like drooping leaves, and I'm using that same technique where I'm using the tip of my brush and I'm pulling down and applying pressure at the same time. And that creates this nice droopy foliage, which is really fun. And just add that wherever you feel like you need a little bit of foliage. Right here, I'm dropping in a little bit of pigment just to create that darkness right around the branches of foliage. It's a little bit darker on the branches and lighter at the tips of the leaves. So by dipping and kind of tapping that pigment back in there, it creates more of a natural look. I'm just about done with my piece, but I see a couple of negative spaces that could be filled in. So I'm going to add these nice little blue dots, kind of berries, so to speak, in the space. And that just kind of adds a little bit of sparkle to this piece and gives you just a little bit more cohesive structure with the bouquet itself. At the bottom of my little bouquet, I'm gonna add kind of a bluish greenish bit of foliage right here, just so it looks, kind of pulls it back behind the rest of the bouquet. Doing that same technique, maybe adding those colors a few other places just so it doesn't stick out so much. And then we're ready to create our little tag. You'll grab a strip of paper. This is 1 inch tall, and I just kept it really long so that I can cut it down after I'm done writing. And one of the tricks to hand lettering is going and doing one letter at a time, especially if you're filling in those shade strokes, these open shades that I'm doing here. If you want to, skip to the very end where you can see the whole message all at once and pencil that using that as a reference, and then penning over top. I've had a little bit of practice here, so I kind of know where my letters want to go and I know exactly what I want to do with them. So freehanding it is going to come a little bit easier. If you're not quite sure where you want your letters to go or what you want them to look like, I would highly recommend penciling everything in beforehand. And with black paper, you can just use a regular pencil and use a nice light touch. But as long as you have good lighting in your space, you'll be able to see that little bit of sheen from your pencil, and then you can trace over top, and you don't even have to erase those pencil lines because they're so subtle on that black paper. So here you have it. I like you a bunch. You can also kind of change this for thank yous, thank you a bunch, and really do this kind of project any time of year. Use some scissors to cut it down to size. I like to do a little ribbon cut and do a notch on either end. But you don't have to do anything super fancy. It's all really up to you. If you end up doing this project, definitely tag me on Instagram. I'm at MelissaFur. Let's show me what you've been up to. I'd love to see it. Thank you so much for watching, and check out melissasesplin.com for more tutorials. Take care.